I had a boss once who told me I was old, and he laughed like it was funny. And I just kind of stood there. That was around the time something started to shift for me, because I had been coloring my hair forever. It was just something that I did, and I didn't really question it. I've spent a lot of money and time over the years trying to hide my, roots and cover my graying hair, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But about 10 years ago, I realized I was just done. I wanted to see what was actually there underneath it all of the years of dye. Like, what does a lifetime of fear and dread actually look like? It took me time to get here, and it wasn't always pretty, but I want to share what that process really looked like for me and why stopping felt like such a radical decision. My very first experience with changing my hair was Sun-In, and if you know, you know. I was aiming for sun-kissed like the ads promised, and instead I got dark, orangey blonde, and by the time I graduated high school, I was already using box dye, Miss Clairol to be exact. And I decided on blonde, of course, because somewhere along the way, I absorbed the message that my natural hair wasn't quite enough. I was always told that I had mousy brown hair, which in hindsight, I don't believe was true. It actually had warmth to it. It was a little auburn, some gold. But supposedly blondes have more fun. In my 20s, I did stop coloring my hair when I was pregnant with both of my daughters, but that wasn't about confidence or a choice, really. It was just concern about chemicals. I stayed natural for several years into my 30s, and then I started coloring it again. And at first it was just for fun, trying, different shades, but somewhere in my mid to my late 30s, it shifted, and coloring my hair stopped being a choice and it became maintenance, like brushing your teeth or paying a bill, something you just had to keep up with. And around that time, the gray really started showing up right in the part more and more. And when I started noticing the gray, I plucked them out completely at first. But when that didn't work anymore, I used brown eyeshadow just to cover the gray in between colorings. And I was always aware of it and maybe fussing over it. So from about 2008 to 2017, I went through many changes, like dark brown, blonde, almost white, auburn. But I wasn't doing it for fun. I didn't hate my hair. I hated how much attention it required. And every time the roots came in, that little wave of insecurity would hit, realizing that someone might see the gray and find out how old I really was. If I'm being completely honest though, I started to feel fake, and I didn't like that feeling. I have pictures from the whole process, and I'll show those at the end of the video. Around 2015, something really shifted for me in a big way, and it happened at the same time that I went back to working in a dental office. Now, I've spent about 18 years in the dental field and with all male doctors, but this time I ended up working for a dentist who really embodied everything ugly about how women are treated as they age. He was loud, he was crude, and he made comments about, just all women, all the time. People in the office, his patients, on the TV in the rooms, people he knew. It was always negative, their weight or their age or their appearance. And he talked about women who didn't fit his idea of what a woman should look like. There were basically two categories. You were hot, or you looked good for your age, or you looked like an old hag. And on one occasion, I mentioned to him that it was my daughter's 27th birthday that day. And he laughed and he bent down. He said, "You know what that means, right? That makes you one old bitch." And he said it like I was supposed to laugh along with him. I didn't. Now, somehow this man had a girlfriend, and she would come into the office regularly. She was in her 40s, and she had bleached white blonde hair, very heavy makeup, so much that, it would come off on the dental bib and on my gloves. And I remember looking at her and just feeling sad, not judgment, just sad. I felt sad that she was under so much pressure to look younger and also to look a certain way, all to please someone else. And it didn't feel like she believed that she could just be herself. As a matter of fact, I have mentioned this same woman in my video about not wearing makeup. So she was a pivotal interaction for me. And I felt this really deep understanding because I could see exactly what that pressure looked like in real life. And the way that he spoke about women with such disdain opened my eyes to the attempts that I personally had been taking to avoid aging in the eyes of others, instead of feeling anxiety about like the women he idolized. I didn't want to be a certain way for anyone. It didn't happen overnight, but the seeds were planted firmly for the very first time. And during that time period, my hair was about as long as it is now. And it was dyed a reddish blonde. And the thought of it growing it out, it felt impossible because it would be a real challenge for me if I had to lose the length to hasten the process. And also, I knew the person that I worked for, and I knew that I would be opening myself up to criticism from him. You got to remember, in the beginning of growing out gray hair, it doesn't look intentional. It just looks like you've stopped taking care of yourself. And people don't know, what you're doing just yet. So after about 6 months or so, which is about that much, I thought, I'm going to make this easier on myself. I'm going to go to a salon. I'm going to blend everything, help the transition without, undoing the work that I put in for the last 6 months. And I learned a valuable lesson there. Choose your stylist carefully, because I walked out basically a kind of a blonde. I didn't love it. I was pretty ticked that it put me in the situation of starting over completely from scratch. But suddenly, I was getting compliments. You look so much younger, so much better. You look fresher and more awake, from the same person that had insulted me before. And honestly, the compliments weren't just from him, though. They were coming from everyone, coworkers, neighbors, families. And I'm human. It made me question my intentions. I needed that job, and so I stayed there for a while longer. Because when someone rewards conformity, it's hard not to accept the huge sense of relief that comes with that. After I left that job, something changed. And in 2017, I decided to try growing out my hair again. And I didn't, try to fix it or try any shortcuts this time, no highlights or lowlights. I just let it grow. And it was a long, slow process. And day to day, it didn't feel like, anything was even happening. But once it got a few inches in, then people started to realize that it was intentional. And that's when the comments started. You're too young for gray hair. You look so pretty with highlights. You're so brave. And my favorite of all time, it looks good on you, but I could never do that. By 2020, it was mostly grown out. It wasn't totally white or silver. I wish it was. But it was just a mix of gray and natural tones, salt and pepper, if you will. And I felt good about it. I was so happy. I felt so authentic and I loved it. Then, in 2023, the last company that I worked for had a yearly team meetup in New York City. And I was the oldest employee. I was already carrying anxiety around that fact. And I semi-caved. I got demi-permanent lowlights to blend the gray a bit around my face, making it less obvious. And I had bangs at that time, so the gray was front and center. And almost immediately I knew, while I was sitting in the salon chair, I knew that this was not what I wanted. I was still trying to hide my age, even now. But thankfully, after a few months, it faded away. And since then, my hair has just grown. And so has my freedom in regard to not just my hair, but my life choices. So since then, I also grew out the bangs that I had kept for years solely to hide my forehead wrinkles. And, because I had been told that bangs were so youthful, you see. I stopped trying to manage all of it. I started meeting each day with my untouched, unhidden self, and I just don't think about it anymore. It doesn't take up space in my head. I even like it. It feels natural and authentic, and it matches my skin tone, and that makes me very happy. I just have hair. If you are thinking about doing this, I'll just be honest, there aren't really shortcuts. It takes time. There's a phase where you're not going to love how it looks. And some people, they have the money to completely rework it with a stylist, and I did not. So I just stuck it out, I stuck with it, and I just kind of kept cutting the color off as it grew. And it got there. But during that period, when I was growing my hair out, I learned a lot about myself. I learned to be more comfortable in my own skin. I learned, I leaned into everything and tried really hard to understand where that discomfort was really coming from. And that changed more than just my hair. So if you're thinking about it, just know that the hardest part really isn't the hair. It's sitting through the part where it doesn't look how you want it to look and then not rushing to fix it. Because once you get past that, it gets a whole lot easier. Thanks for being here on this journey with me. And I'm going to take another look very soon at what's really behind the pressure for women to color their hair when the gray starts to come in. For now, though, here's the visual walkthrough of my transition from about 2015-16 up to today. Thanks. Okay, here is the start of my transition. Actually, I went a little bit further back. I decided I would go ahead and show images from the beginning of all of the times that I referenced in the video previously. This was my mousy brown hair circa 1969. And then by 1979, at 14, I was already using Sun-In, which is just such a shame because my hair was such a pretty color. And here you start to see the very obvious Sun-In red, red-orange color. And then by this is 1984, I was already using box dye. I was using Miss Clairol, and the 80s entered, and so did that look. And I had very white bleached hair at 21, 1986. And then when I had my daughter at the start of 22, I let my hair grow out. So by actually the 1990s, early 90s, my hair was already showing normal color. I continued to color. Here you saw several different years. There was 2008, 2009, I was going darker. 2011, around the time that Chad and I got married, it was quite dark. And then after that, at 46, it was the darkest that it had ever been. Decided to go back to some more reddish tones here. So the main reason I want to show these is because I was never afraid to try different colors. Here was 2015 at 50. I got hair cut and I had the highlights added, lowlights added. So I was never afraid to show color, except for right here, because this is my general expression for the first few months of the transition. I didn't like it. I didn't like what I saw. And after being used to changing color so many times, it was really hard to stick it out. My hair was a mess after that first appointment to try and blend it, and I was still on the first try here. And really, it just caused me to do a complete turnaround. I went in the opposite direction. I went blonder and blonder. Got lots of compliments from it and much more positive reinforcement than I had when it was growing out. And unfortunately, that was something that I kind of listened to. I didn't listen to my internal voice like I wish that I had. So finally, after several more years, I realized the blonde is not right for me, and I gave it another try. I started in 2017. Now all of these pictures are really, they may not be in the exact order. I think they're pretty approximate. I know this is September 2018 because it was our anniversary. So there's some dates that I'm very specific on, but because my hair, as it was growing, I would just kind of keep cutting some off. It changed a lot during those few years. So 2018, 2019, they may not be approximate, but this is kind of what it looked like. And there were a lot of comments about this time. You know, there was no covering it up. I wasn't ready to commit to just cut that color off. And if I had, I may have been better for it, but I wasn't ready to commit that way. It was already hard enough that my hair was a length that I didn't want, much less with the color transition happening. It was a pretty big time of insecurity, and it really took a lot for me to get through it. And if you start to go through it, this is something that you may encounter. Like here, I always wear my hair in a ponytail. I couldn't do that when it was that short. And it was a real struggle with clips and barrettes and that kind of thing. You know, this is not an easy thing to do. And if you're going through it, I applaud you. And probably the best advice I could give is just to stick it out. Because, you know, if you can get past that point of discomfort, knowing that there's going to be an end in sight, then I think you'll get there and you might really be happy with where you end up.
I didn't always like it, as you can see from some of the images here, and it was shorter than it had ever been in my life. So I knew once it grew out, I was going to grow my hair out again. I just had to get rid of that blonde. So I continued to try a few different hairstyles and some layers, and here it was almost gone, the last little bit. And then finally in 2021, the dye was finally gone. So it was a good 4 years. If you count the couple years before that, when I made that first attempt, it was longer than that. 2023 was when I had that insecurity about being around all of my younger coworkers, and I got the demi-permanent low lights. You can see them here in this image around my face, which is what I was trying to cover up the gray there. And then by 2026, it had completely faded within months, but now I'm back to my natural color, which looks different depending on which light I'm in. If I'm outside, it might look just as silver as it can be, but inside it might look dark. And I'm really, really glad that I stuck to it, because I feel authentic, and this is just what matters to me, is living my best life the best way that I can. I hope that this may have helped you during your transition, and I'm really glad that you're here.